Now, 25 years ago this week, Oliver Tambo died, having returned to South Africa in 1990 after the ban on the ANC was lifted by the then President FW de Klerk. Now, due to ill health following an earlier stroke, Tambo handed over the party presidency to his colleague Nelson Mandela in 1991 and took up the post of national chairperson. I guess the rest is history. The ANC's 1994 election victory has in many respects been attributed to his work over the years. So 25 years after his death in Johannesburg, South Africans still say his legacy lives on firmly. So on this Freedom Day in 2018, we're going to take a look back now at his massive contribution to South Africa as I take you live to Cape Town, and former Constitutional Court Judge Albie Sachs is standing by to talk to us. Justice Sachs, good afternoon to you and a very warm welcome. First of all, you've been part of producing a movie called Oliver Tambo, Have You Heard from Johannesburg? And you say he lived a life on the principles of ethics, compassion, inclusion, social justice and equality. I wonder sometimes if we underestimate his role.
I've been surprised and a little bit disappointed to see how few people in South Africa know how massive his contribution was. And it's partly that he was a very modest person. He never proclaimed himself, he never saw himself as the leader. He was the acting president, he always said, of the ANC in exile. His contributions, I think, were threefold. A, he kept the ANC intact over 30 years. Other liberation movements, exiled movements were splintering, fighting each other. He came back with a united ANC. B, he led a huge international campaign for the release of political prisoners, Nelson Mandela and other prisoners, and to isolate apartheid South Africa. It was the biggest social movement throughout the world since the days of the international campaign to abolish slavery. And C, he was really, I asked the question, if you did a paternity test on our constitution, whose DNA would come up? And very, very few South Africans know, except those of us who were working closely with him, the DNA of Oliver Tambo, because the basic clash then was between group rights, power sharing between ethnic racial groups, and he insisted on a universal franchise, majority rule, and a Bill of Rights. We had to be protecting people not because they belonged to groups, but because they were human beings. He was really the author of the Bill of Rights as central to our constitutional order.
Justice Sachs, do you ever reflect on what kind of leader, what kind of president, what kind of cabinet minister possibly he might have made?
Well, he was a great listener, a natural democrat. He liked strong people around him because he was very confident of his own views. He would have been extremely collegial. He was naturally courteous and honest to a degree. So he would have been, in a sense, the equal of Nelson Mandela with his own persona, his own style, his own gravitas, his own humor. Maybe he would have sung a little bit more. He was a great person for choral singing. I can't remember hearing Nelson Mandela singing, but he mightn't have been as good a boxer as Nelson Mandela had been when he was a youth. But he was certainly been of that caliber, a great unifier, but on the basis of principle and absolutely insistent on integrity. He would have been totally against corruption, totally against any abuse of office. These would have been strongly marked in our constitutional order if he had been our first president.
So in that respect then, Justice Sachs, what might or what should current present South African politicians be learning from him?
I think everybody, all politicians and human beings and citizens, people, can learn that you can be proud and strong and affirmative without being rude, without being aggressive, without putting other people down. I think they would learn from him the importance of building up the number of your friends, not isolating people who don't agree with you, and limiting the number of your opponents, and the ultimate objective, make an opponent even a friend, if that's at all possible. He was a natural diplomatic person, a great diplomatic person, but based on a centered, honest, honorable person. The two go together. If you are deeply honest inside yourself and clear in your thinking and candid with the people, then you're able to embrace everybody and anybody.
What about your relationship, Justice Sachs, with Oliver Tambo? You say, and I think you've been quoted correctly as saying, he had a greater impact on me than any other human being, and he couldn't have been more different than I.
Yes, it's interesting that the person who has the biggest impact on you is the one who's the most different. He grew up in rural Transkei, poor African family. He had strong tribal marks. I grew up very cosmopolitan, internationalist, socialist in Cape Town, very urban. He was deeply religious. He was planning to become a minister in the Anglican Church. I grew up in a very secular family. You would have thought we had nothing in common. But we had something intensely deep, spiritual, internal, our hatred of oppression, our desire for emancipation, our respect for the diversity of human beings. And it was interesting when he had to prepare a conference paper for an international conference on religion in London, he asked me to help him. He didn't go to the religious desk. They would have said, we know a Catholic and there's somebody important in the Methodist Church. He came to me because at a level of that deep sense of what it means to be a human being, he felt we could communicate well. And maybe it's because of our huge differences in background and culture and even religious persuasion or non-religious persuasion, we could meet at an almost pure level of almost a beautiful level of principle, of ideals, of values, and it gave us a terrific closeness to each other. When I think I was number 24 elected on the NEC of the ANC at a marvelous conference in Durban, 1991. For the first time, the exiles, the people from prison, the people from the mass democratic movement, we're coming together, democracy in action, we're being chosen, and I go up to the platform and I wave the arm that was destroyed by a bomb as my signal to the cheers and the singing of everybody. And I get onto the platform and he leans over to me and he is paralyzed on the one side and I've lost one arm, and I put out my good arm and he puts out his good arm and he actually put my hands to his lips in a kind of little personal gesture of connection and appreciation. And it was the most beautiful moment one could imagine. Democracy triumph and my connection at that very intimate level with this very great leader of the South African people, a world leader, a leader of enormous accomplishment and grace, acknowledging me in that way.
Justice Sachs, thank you so much for that recollection. What about his relationship with Nelson Mandela?
Sorry, there was interference on the line.
I'll put the question to you again. You've reflected on your relationship with him. What can you tell us about his personal relationship with Nelson Mandela?
You know, they were like brothers. Darlie, Nelson Mandela's son, Oliver Tambo's son, describes the moment when they met in Stockholm, where Mandela had gone to meet his old law partner, his comrade in the political struggle, his friend, his closest friend, and now they're meeting after 30 years, and it's in a house in Stockholm where Oliver Tambo was recovering from a stroke, and he said they embraced each other. They laughed and laughed and laughed, and when it came to the door, each one said, after you, no, after you, after you. They were like children together. He said it was the most remarkable moment. These two great leaders just overcome with joy. I remember being asked in Mozambique, this is in the struggle days, who is the top leader of the ANC? Is it Oliver Tambo or Nelson Mandela? And I asked Oliver Tambo, I was working with him on the statute of the ANC. He said, immediately, no, it's Nelson Mandela, he's the commander-in-chief. Afterwards, when Nelson Mandela came up to Lusaka, I asked him the same question. No, he said, it's Oliver Tambo, he's the president of the ANC. Each had that enormous respect for the other. It wasn't competing for the top job. It was competing, if you like, to make the maximum contribution to the liberation of our people, and each had that huge, deep, natural respect for the other.
Justice Sachs, I wonder if we can move on and perhaps
I remember
get your views on this Freedom Day 2018. Yes, indeed. Please finish the thought.
No. When Oliver Tambo issued a book of Mandela's speeches while Mandela was locked up, he wrote a beautiful preface, and he commented on Mandela, the office being enormously crowded, and he said Mandela was attractive to the youth because his impatience reflected their impatience. He was attractive to women as he was to all people. And in a sense, it was almost a comparison between the two different personalities. The one a little quieter, a little calmer, the other a little more extrovert, a little more outgoing. The one bigger, taller, more thrustful, if you like. The other a little more reticent, but making a marvelous combination.
Justice Sachs, I was going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just reflecting on this Freedom Day 2018 for us, this 23rd Freedom Day. I think at a recent memorial lecture you had this to say: we have to use that democracy now for the second revolution. The second stage of the revolution is in the social lives of people with more access to land, to opportunities. We have got to destroy a culture of privilege, racial supremacy, which is still very strong in this country. Those are very important and wise words. I presume you still stand by them. Do you think they're possible, though? Can we achieve those lofty ideals that you're exhorting us to chase?
Absolutely, and we'll do it in the same way that we destroyed the system of apartheid. A lot of people now are saying, you know, how can we call it Freedom Day? We're not free. And I'm kind of astonished. I was blown up, I was thrown into prison, my books were banned. These things were not just my personal experience. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people underwent those experiences. Now we can speak our minds, we're very, very free. But it's not an equal society, it's not a fair society, it's not a safe society. And this isn't just a question of a few wicked people or a few corrupt people not doing the right thing. There are things wrong in the very nature and structure of our society that we have to deal with. The big difference now is we don't have to go into the underground, we don't have to pick up guns, we don't have to have international isolation of South Africa, we don't have to have millions of people going into the streets to overthrow a wicked state. We can use our democratic rights, we can use the freedom to meet these other challenges, and we've got to do so in the same way with seeking unity, in calling on the best of all our people, in being frank, in being open, in being honorable, in being principled, that to bring about the next wave. It won't be a sudden revolution on one particular day, April the 27th, it won't be January the 23rd or something like that. It'll be a process, but a process of major deep transformation which this country still needs.
Are you, or do you remain confident about the Constitution, the fact that it's robust, that it's intact? You were questioned recently at a lecture that you gave by students who were concerned about the Constitution. One student saying that it was a betrayal, it's against us, particularly when we are poor. Is there concern that there is perhaps some disenchantment with the Constitution right now?
Yes, they're making a good point, but in a bad way, because they don't read the text of the Constitution and they don't understand the context in which it was made. So they see the fact that so many years after the Constitution's adopted, they're still poor, that there's still massive inequality, that there's still all sorts of barriers for them to get on in life. That's a very valid point and necessary point. But the Constitution doesn't bring about the change. It creates the instruments for people to bring about change in an orderly way, in a progressive way, and in a united way. So my argument is, and my deep belief is, the Constitution itself facilitates and promotes change, orderly change, principled change. It requires change. Now it's up to us, the people. We, the people whose struggle made the Constitution, we, the people, our struggle must make the Constitution real in the lives of the nation. Don't trample on it. See it as for what it really is. It was a triumph over injustice at a certain stage. Now we use its mechanisms. It can be the vote, it can be speech, it can be mobilization, it can be industrial action, it can be going to court, it can be writing, it can be singing, it can be speaking, it can be dancing, it can be painting. It can take many, many different forms, but to use the rights that we get under the Constitution to get that next wave of transformation and change in this country.
Just a final question, Justice Sachs. Do you have more faith in the new administration than you did in the past?
Well, let me put it this way. As a former judge, I'm not supposed to be partial to any particular administration or any particular leader, but I'm going to be. I worked closely with Cyril Ramaphosa in the negotiations period, and he was always a step ahead of us, and we were smart. We had a very powerful team. We'd lived everywhere in the world. We thought we debated. We thought we knew it all. Cyril somehow was a step ahead, a visionary, hardworking, a nice kind of humor, very strong temperament, easygoing, friendly, a lot of great qualities. But the qualities without the program, without the vision, I think don't amount to very much. I'm very, very hopeful. And it's not just him as a leader or a particular group he represents. I think people were crying out, aching for the kinds of things that he's saying and doing now. And as long as he continues on that path, my guess is, and I'm not speaking in a partisan way now, my guess is there will be enormous response from the people in South Africa, and I can see big changes coming in the coming period.
Justice Albie Sachs in Cape Town, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.